Former Defence Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula's appointment as the National Assembly Speaker has been met with criticism from opposition parties and some sectors of civil society. To talk to us more about the broader implications of her appointment is Corruption Watch Executive Director David Lewis, political analyst Professor Sethulego Matebesi, IFP MP Narend Singh, and DA MP Siviwe Gwarube. You're a part of the conversation also tonight on the social platforms, on social media, WhatsApp 072-110-5584 or tweet us at Newzroom 405. Good evening to you all, and thank you very much for your time. David Lewis, I'll begin with you. Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula, reshuffled minister, now promoted, ascending to the Speaker of Parliament position, literally meaning that she is now in charge of the third arm of government, so to speak, and quite key decisions that she will need to make, including a decision of how her own matter that is being inquired is going to be handled. What are the implications of this appointment?
Well, I mean, the implications are that we're going to have a failed cabinet minister and somebody who's never been particularly successful in her various portfolios. Now, you know, notionally the third most powerful person in the land. As far as I know, if the president and the deputy president are indisposed, she becomes president of the country. And it's completely ridiculous. You know, you don't promote somebody after they've failed. You demote them or you put them out to pasture. I think she's been a cabinet minister for the last 25 years. And I think this is a real finger up to Parliament. As I thought the ANC parliamentary lists were, to include people like Zwane and Mahumapela and people with huge clouds hanging over their heads. She has failed in her portfolio, just like they did in theirs. And she has, just like them, corruption clouds hanging over her head, as you said, immensely complicated by the fact that the committees that have to investigate it are now investigating the person who is effectively their leader. So I think this is a terrible appointment. I also have to say that I thought that Thandi Modise was a breath of fresh air after the previous speaker, and I think it's a great pity that she has been demoted, which is effectively what she has been.
Some would argue, though, David, that in fact, if they have already argued it, they say she was formally elected through a democratic process in Parliament where people voted, and it was transparent. Votes were counted, and she's in. The fact that there are these allegations certainly do not disqualify her from participating in that democratic process.
No, there's no legal disqualification. But you would have thought that there was an ethical disqualification. And, you know, somebody with those clouds hanging over her head, and that includes the cloud of her portfolio having failed in the face of the gravest security threat that South Africa has faced since 1994, would have been what disqualified her, even if there was no legal disqualification. I should also say that, you know, although everybody knows that she will be elected because the ANC enjoy a majority in Parliament, my understanding is that she still has to be elected, and it would show respect for the democratic process that you're so concerned about if the ANC said, this is our nominee for the Speaker, and left it to Parliament to then elect the Speaker. It would be her because of the ANC's parliamentary majority. But there's just a respect for the processes that is important, that says that they would say, this is our nominee, not this is who's going to be the Speaker, because that process, as I understand the process, and the two parliamentarians here can correct me if I'm wrong, still has to face an election in the National Assembly. And so she's only Speaker after that election. And I imagine that there are going to be loud objections to her. And I have to say that if there are, And if the election of the Speaker, which should be a dignified event, turns into one of the customary parliamentary fiascos, I'm afraid that the governing party have only themselves to blame for that.
Well, Siviwe, you feel that a candidate as the Democratic Alliance, unsuccessful your candidate was, naturally as it would have been expected, and the majority of those who were in that hybrid meeting voted for Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula to be the Speaker of Parliament. And this is an ANC selection, one would say, and exactly that. And maybe the DA really does not have a say in who the ANC would select and appoint.
Look, I think David raises an important point, Abo, in that, yes, of course, I mean, there's nothing legally preventing the ANC from electing a candidate of their choice and fielding a candidate of their choice. But you would think that after especially some of the revelations that came from the State Capture Commission, where you realize that the Zondo Commission, where you realize that the role of Parliament has been really eroded over the past decade or so, and it has not fulfilled its role as an oversight body. You would think that the ANC, as some have said, that they are effectively on trial. If you look at that commission, you would think that they would also pick somebody who would not be antagonistic towards accountability, and not somebody who is a failed minister. But it was important for the Democratic Alliance to field a candidate, even though, of course, we knew that we don't have the numbers in Parliament. But it's the principle behind putting an alternative candidate to somebody that we believe is wholly inappropriate for that role, which is Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula.
Does this render Parliament toothless in a sense?
Look, I mean, Parliament has had its many challenges, but I think that the person who leads the National Assembly becomes very crucial and sets the tone very much for what Parliament can do. But I mean, as a clear example, now Parliament is going to be holding an inquiry into the unrest that took place several weeks ago, of which the Speaker now of the National Assembly played a very integral part in. So I think that this really flies in the face of accountability and oversight, and actually quite in bad faith by the president to also install somebody directly from the executive into a separate arm of the state. And just even the way that he said it, how, we're going to be deploying the minister elsewhere. I mean, just shows me either there's no understanding of what Parliament is meant to do, or there's a complete acceptance, or there's a complete desire to erode the powers of Parliament and render it useless. So I think it's up to the opposition parties, my colleague here, that we've got to be on our toes, because of course the job is bigger than just who is the Speaker of the National Assembly. And we've got to keep pushing hard for accountability. But it's not made easy by this candidate. It's not made easy by the current Speaker.
Narend, great emphasis is placed on the impartiality of the Speaker or whoever holds that particular position. Do you think Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula is capable of doing that?
Well, good evening, Jabal. Good evening, fellow panelists and your viewers. Well, time will tell. But let me just first respond to David. I think we've been overtaken by events, David, already, because we did go through a democratic process on Thursday when the Speaker was elected. And I think it was not unexpected because the majority party elected her. We as the IFP made it very clear even before the elections took place that we were very disappointed with the fact that the ANC would nominate the former Minister of Defense, Minister Nqakula, now Speaker Nqakula, for the position. But she is elected. She is now the Speaker of Parliament. And as my colleague says, we've got to make her account for her action or her inaction, past, present, or future. And that's something that I think we have a responsibility to do as members of Parliament in that House.
As members of parliament in that house, of course, there is this question of the inquiry that needs to go and be conducted against the speaker who is sitting there. How do you see that particular process playing out? And do you see the political games beginning to interfere with that process?
Well, you see, the ANC says one thing and does something else, even right from the office of the president. You know, they speak about anti-corruption and they speak about ethics and things like that. But, you know, it's very important to practice these things and not take South Africans for a ride. Now, we would hope, and you know, we live in hope, that when that inquiry takes place, there will be complete impartiality, fairness, allow both sides to be heard. And if the person who is alleged to have done anything wrong is found guilty of wrongdoing and is holding a position, in this case the position of the speaker, then the person ought to resign. I mean, that's common principles of a person who is found guilty of, you know, corruption or whatever it is that she's alleged to have been involved in. So we would be keeping an eye, and I'm sure all political parties, not only the opposition parties, but even the ruling party members will be keeping a very, very careful eye on that investigation and ensure that there is no interference whatsoever from any source in ensuring that, you know, the hearing goes as it should.
Professor Matebesi, Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula, through her political connection and connectedness, has managed to work her way up to Speaker of the National Assembly. Will the country live to regret this moment?
Well, good evening, Thabo, and good evening to South Africans and my fellow panelists. Look, I hear where my fellow panelists are stating the ANC does not have any choice. It does not have the luxury to be able to choose somebody who is not tainted. If we can look a couple of years back, the so-called Smolanyana skeletons in the cupboard, and if you look at the ANC parliamentarians, it's going to be very hard to find a parliamentarian who does not have skeletons in the cupboard. And I mean, we had just recently someone which I overemphasized. I thought it's a credible cadre of the African National Congress, the former Minister of Health. Also, serious allegations, because we're still waiting for the report from the SIU to become public, knowledge, because the president, for some odd reasons, have decided not to release that report. But definitely going forward, I think there will be tremendous pressure on the speaker and from the opposition party, but also from South Africans, to be transparent, but also, very importantly, to do what is right when the so-called unrest investigation starts in Parliament.
Yeah. For all the reasons raised, Prof, do you think she is a fit and proper person to hold the office of the Speaker of the National Assembly?
Well, in the eyes of the African National Congress, but if you speak about good governance, I don't think in any democracy or any country with values, the principle of accountability and ethical and moral governance would have appointed somebody with such cloud hanging around her for such a critical position and at such a critical stage where we find ourselves in our democracy almost 3 decades later. You need somebody who will have cleaned up not only Parliament, but also in terms of enhancing and consolidating what we have achieved as a country. But I don't think it has been an appropriate appointment, irrespective of whether the ANC is not capable of fielding somebody who is clean.
All right. Let's take a break. We'll continue in a moment. Professor Matebesi staying on, Narend Singh, as well as Siviwe Gwarube. David Lewis, fortunately, we're going to let you go. I appreciate your time, but thank you very much for joining on tonight. The conversation continues on In Focus in a moment. Welcome back with us here on In Focus, the conversation with Professor Sethulego Matebesi, Narend Singh, and Siviwe Gwarube. We had David Lewis moments ago. We had to let him go. But we'll continue with, of course, the three that are left with us. Before the break, Professor Matebesi, you raised the issue of democratic centralism within the ANC, that allows for these things to be done, current deployment. Do you think the MPs had an obligation and a duty to reject the candidate if they felt, I suppose, was not up to the task?
Yes, most definitely, but we should also ask which MPs are we referring to, because each time an election has to take place at our parliament, we often see the ANC's chairperson, making public pronouncement that the ANC MPs will be instructed to vote for an ANC cadre. So it's very difficult. Well, we can now argue that perhaps the African National Congress MP should have voted with their consent, but that will never happen, especially once the vote is a transparent one. But this was a secret ballot, but yet once again, as expected, the ANC MPs voted according to the party line. And this has been the case throughout democracy, even if the ANC may seem to be highly divided. There was an opportunity for them to vote with their conscience, but nonetheless, they decided to do what they are known for and putting the interest of their party first.
Yeah. And Siviwe, one would argue that in fact, Gwarube argues that the DA would have done exactly the same. In fact, you did, and all of you voted according to party line.
Look, I think what I suppose the Prof is also saying, Thabo, is that the problem becomes when the organization is so eroded of even any critical or any credible candidate that could have done this job. Thandi Modise did an incredible job as a speaker, and I think she had the right temperament for the job. She brought together different political interests across the floor, and she was able to be fair and exercise some kind of fairness. I don't think that this current speaker will be able to do that just by looking at what she has been of her temperament as the Minister in Defense, her performance as the Minister of Defense. So yes, for sure, political parties can field candidates of their choice, and that's what they would do. But it speaks volumes that the ANC can't even cobble together a credible candidate that would replace the former speaker. And what they've now done is that they have prioritized giving somebody a critical position only because they needed to be an alternative placement, and not for the interests of the institution. And that, for me, I think is the criticism. It's not about whether or not a political party will field a candidate. It's about the type of candidate that they're fielding, and the fact that she is not somebody that we view based on her record is somebody who can who would be able to do this job and do it well.
To quote what she said in her acceptance speech, I extend a hand of cooperation to each member and each political party represented in the House and pledge to protect the integrity and the mandate of the House together with each one of you without fear or favor. You are literally slapping her extended hand to you right now, Siviwe.
I'm not slapping anything, Thabo. All I'm really interested in is really the functioning of Parliament, because when Parliament doesn't work, then we've got a big, serious problem. And I think that's one of the things that really, that really disappoints me in our democracy, is that we really aren't vexing the kind of powers that Parliament can and should have. And it really upsets me, I suppose, when we get people who will be leading that institution who have not covered themselves in glory. Yeah. So not at all, not slapping her hand. And as my colleague said, look, we will work with her and we will work and see. But we will keep a very close eye on this current Speaker of the National Assembly.
The question has been raised by yourself, Siviwe, but I think the Economic Freedom Fighters have also raised this thing of the president chopping and changing who sits where and how. And many are arguing that, for example, the former Speaker, Thandi Modise, was not tied to reject or accept that offer. The president said, as an individual, I prefer you to come and serve in my cabinet. She could have said no.
No, of course, she could have. And I mean, we can't, I suppose if your boss does ask you to serve in a particular position, it would be perhaps even career limiting to decline. But I mean, ultimately, look, I mean, the president does appoint his own cabinet, and that is something that is and should be given to him. It's his prerogative. But the problem becomes, and I think it's so important what Prof said earlier about the fact that it's the crop of leaders that is available. Even with this reshuffle, I mean, what you found is that the president was playing musical chairs because ultimately he has nowhere to move. There's virtually no credible leaders left in the ANC. As a result, what you have is there's no new blood, no new ideas, and ultimately what you have is people with recycled bad reps, and that's kind of what South Africa's dealt with.
Narend, this question of the violation of the separation of powers by the president raised by other political parties, as IFP, I mean, are you interested in pursuing that particular further and have it maybe interrogated a little bit more in whether or not the president was correct, for example, in his address to say, well, she's being reshuffled from defense and military veterans and she'll be deployed elsewhere?
Well, I think the president was very, very careful. It might have been a faux pas as far as we're concerned, but I think he was very careful not to mention where she was going to be redeployed to. But we all read it, if you read between the lines, and I think Professor also, even though he's on the outside, would have read between the lines that there was something in the offing, and it would not be an ambassadorial position or something like that. It was something senior. And no sooner he said that, I mean, the word was out that she was going to be nominated as the Speaker of Parliament. Now, it would be very wrong for a president who heads the executive to have openly said, well, I am moving her to Parliament because we are an independent arm of government. We operate in our own space, and the executive have no right as members of the executive to nominate or to recommend anybody to Parliament. Of course, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, let me put it that way, as the head of the ANC, has every right within an ANC caucus to suggest to his caucus and fellow members, let's put up Minister Nqakula as Speaker of Parliament. But I think it was a bit of a faux pas on his side because the game was given up as soon as he did the shuffle. And, I don't know why, Prof, you can tell us, politician, why we call it a reshuffle. It's a reshuffle. They're taking 10 cards from a pack and just moving the cards at different sides of the board. There's nothing new. No new cards coming into the pack. And that's what we want to see. I mean, then we would see some credible, viable executive that's accountable to the public and people of South Africa. But it's taking the same people, pushing them around and just laying the cards differently on the same table, whether they're good cards or bad cards. And many of them are bad cards. And we expected the ANC to really, take into consideration the country and not cater deployment and trying to appease factions within the ANC.
Let's leave it there tonight. I appreciate you all for staying on. Professor Sethulego Matebesi, Narend Singh, as well as Siviwe Gwarube.